In 480 BC, the greatest army the ancient world had ever seen marched toward Greece. Its leader was King Xerxes I, ruler of the mighty Persian Empire. His empire stretched from Egypt to India. Millions lived under his rule, and dozens of nations answered to his command. Ancient writers claimed his invasion force numbered in the millions. Modern historians believe the real number was far smaller, perhaps between 100,000 and 200,000 soldiers. Even so, it was one of the largest military expeditions of the ancient world. Standing in its path was a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae. If Persia broke through, the road to southern Greece would lie open. Athens would fall, Sparta would stand alone, and Greece itself might cease to exist. The Greek city-states knew they could not defeat Xerxes in an open battle, so they chose the only battlefield where numbers mattered less: Thermopylae, a narrow strip of land between towering mountains and the sea, where only a limited number of Persian soldiers could fight at once. To defend it, Sparta sent one of its two kings, Leonidas. He did not march alone. Although history remembers the 300 Spartans, Leonidas was joined by roughly 7,000 Greek soldiers from several city-states, including Thespians, Thebans, Corinthians, Phocians, and others. Together, they formed a coalition determined to delay the Persian advance for as long as possible. For 2 days, they achieved the impossible. Wave after wave of Persian attacks crashed against the Greek line. The elite immortals, Xerxes' most feared warriors, entered the battle expecting a swift victory. Instead, they found themselves trapped in the narrow pass, unable to use their overwhelming numbers. Greek hoplites fought shoulder to shoulder, their bronze shields locked together and their long spears reaching far beyond the Persian front ranks. The Persian army advanced, only to be pushed back again and again. Watching from his throne overlooking the battlefield, Xerxes grew increasingly frustrated. How could a handful of Greeks stop the greatest empire on earth? Then everything changed. A local Greek named Ephialtes betrayed his homeland. He revealed a hidden mountain path that allowed Persian forces to move behind the Greek position. Leonidas received the news before dawn. He understood exactly what it meant. Thermopylae had been lost. Many of the Greek allies were ordered to withdraw, preserving their armies for the battles still to come. But Leonidas refused to leave. He remained with his 300 Spartans, alongside approximately 700 Thespians, who chose to stay voluntarily, and a smaller force of Thebans whose role remains debated by historians. They knew they would never return home. As the Persians surrounded the pass, the final battle began. Ancient sources describe the fighting as desperate and relentless. Leonidas himself was killed in combat. His warriors continued fighting over his body until their spears shattered and their swords broke. When even their weapons were gone, they fought with whatever remained. One by one, they fell. Xerxes had won. The pass was his. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, Xerxes ordered Leonidas' body to be found after the battle. In an extraordinary act of anger, he had the Spartan king's head cut off and his body displayed, a punishment considered deeply dishonorable in the ancient world and one rarely attributed to the Persian king. To Persia, the war was over. The greatest defenders of Greece were dead. Nothing now stood between Xerxes and victory, or so he believed. News of the defeat at Thermopylae spread across Greece with terrifying speed. King Leonidas was dead. The 300 Spartans had fallen. The narrow pass that had held back the greatest army on earth now belonged to Persia. For many Greeks, it seemed that the war was already lost. There was nothing left between Xerxes and the heart of Greece. His army marched south almost unopposed. One city after another submitted to the Persian king, believing resistance was hopeless. Others had already chosen Persia's side before the invasion even began, convinced that no alliance of Greek city-states could possibly defeat the largest empire of the age. But one city refused to surrender: Athens. Its survival depended on a man who had seen the future long before the war began. His name was Themistocles. Years earlier, Athens had discovered a rich vein of silver in the mines of Laurion. Many citizens wanted the wealth divided among themselves. Themistocles argued for something far more ambitious. Instead of spending the silver, he convinced Athens to build a navy. Hundreds of triremes, fast, deadly warships powered by rows of skilled oarsmen, were constructed before anyone knew how desperately Greece would need them. Now, after Thermopylae, his decision would determine the fate of an entire civilization. As Xerxes advanced, Themistocles faced an impossible choice. Athens could not defend itself against the enormous Persian army. Rather than sacrifice the city's people behind walls that would eventually fall, he ordered something almost unimaginable. The city would be abandoned. Families gathered only what they could carry. Children, the elderly, and thousands of civilians boarded ships bound for the nearby island of Salamis and other safe locations. Entire neighborhoods were left behind, their homes silent as the last Athenians disappeared across the sea. It was one of the largest evacuations in the ancient world. Soon afterward, Xerxes entered Athens. The city was almost empty. Only a small group of defenders remained on the Acropolis, hoping to make one final stand. They were overwhelmed. Ancient sources describe Persian soldiers capturing the hill before setting much of Athens ablaze. Smoke rose above the temples. Wooden buildings collapsed into the flames. The cultural heart of Greece appeared to have been destroyed. Watching from a distance, many refugees believed they would never see their city again. For Xerxes, everything was unfolding exactly as planned. He had broken through Thermopylae. He had captured Athens. The greatest city in Greece was burning. Victory seemed inevitable. Yet beneath the despair, another battle was taking shape. While the Persian king celebrated on land, Themistocles was preparing a fight that would not be won with walls or with spears. It would be decided at sea. But first, he had to convince the divided Greek alliance to risk everything on one final gamble. Many commanders wanted to retreat. Some argued that Salamis was already lost. Others believed each city should defend itself separately. If the Greeks failed to agree, Persia would destroy them one by one. Themistocles understood that Greece no longer needed another heroic last stand. It needed something far more dangerous: a trap. The Persian army had conquered Athens. Its temples were burning. Its people had fled. From his throne overlooking the coast, King Xerxes believed victory was only days away. But one man saw an opportunity hidden inside Greece's greatest defeat. Themistocles knew the Greeks could never defeat Persia in an open-sea battle. The Persian fleet was enormous. Ancient writers claimed it numbered more than 1,000 ships. Modern historians believe the actual number was likely between 600 and 800 warships, still one of the largest naval forces ever assembled in the ancient world. The Greeks had far fewer, perhaps around 370 triremes. On paper, defeat seemed inevitable. Unless the battle was fought somewhere, numbers meant very little. Themistocles had chosen the narrow waters between the island of Salamis and the Greek mainland. Inside the strait, the Persian fleet would struggle to maneuver. Its superior numbers would become a disadvantage. But there was one problem. Xerxes had no reason to sail into such a trap. So Themistocles decided to deceive him. According to ancient sources, he secretly sent a trusted servant named Sisinus to the Persian king with a false message. The message claimed that the Greek alliance was collapsing. It said the Greek commanders were arguing with one another and planned to escape before dawn. If Xerxes acted immediately, he could trap the entire Greek fleet and end the war in a single night. It was exactly what Xerxes wanted to hear. Confident that Greece was on the verge of collapse, he ordered his fleet into the narrow waters of Salamis. The trap had been set. Before sunrise, Persian warships began filling the strait. Row after row of ships pressed forward, each trying to be first into the battle. As more vessels entered, the water became increasingly crowded. Captains struggled to turn. Oars collided. Ships blocked one another's paths. The greatest fleet in the world had trapped itself. Then the Greeks attacked. Their triremes surged forward in disciplined formation, bronze rams crashing into the sides of Persian ships. Splintered wood flew across the water as vessel after vessel lost control. Unable to maneuver freely, many Persian ships drifted into one another. Some were rammed. Others sank beneath the weight of panic and confusion. Greek crews, trained for exactly this kind of close-quarters fighting, pressed their advantage relentlessly. From a nearby hillside, Xerxes watched the battle unfold. He had expected to witness the destruction of the Greek fleet. Instead, he watched his own navy collapse. By the end of the day, the Persian fleet had suffered a devastating defeat. Hundreds of ships had been destroyed, captured, or forced to flee. For the first time in his campaign, Xerxes had lost. The consequences reached far beyond the battlefield. Without control of the sea, supplying such a massive army deep inside Greece became increasingly difficult. Fearing that his lines of communication could be cut, Xerxes made a decision few expected. He returned to Asia with much of his army, leaving behind a powerful force under his general Mardonius to finish the conquest the following year. Persia had won at Thermopylae. Persia had burned Athens. But at Salamis, the course of the war changed forever. The sacrifice of Leonidas had bought Greece something more valuable than victory: time. And now, the Greeks were finally ready to fight back. The Battle of Salamis had shattered Persia's confidence. For the first time, the empire that seemed unstoppable had been forced to retreat. Yet the war was not over. Although King Xerxes returned to Asia with much of his army, he refused to abandon his dream of conquering Greece. Instead, he left behind one of his most trusted generals, Mardonius. Commanding tens of thousands of experienced Persian soldiers, Mardonius believed the Greeks were exhausted, divided, and incapable of fighting another major campaign. He was wrong. The victory at Salamis had done more than destroy Persian ships. It had united Greece. Old rivalries were set aside as Sparta, Athens, Corinth, Megara, and many other city-states prepared for one final confrontation. This time, there would be no retreat. The Greek alliance gathered one of the largest hoplite armies ever assembled. Leading them was the Spartan regent Pausanias, acting on behalf of Leonidas' young son, who was still too young to rule. Nearly a year had passed since Thermopylae, but the memory of Leonidas had never faded. Every Spartan marching north knew exactly where the road had begun. Now, it would end. The two armies met near the town of Plataea in 479 BC. For several days, neither side committed to a full attack. Each commander waited for the other to make a mistake. Then confusion struck the Greek camp. A difficult repositioning during the night caused parts of the allied army to become separated. From a distance, Mardonius believed the Greeks were retreating in panic. Certain that victory was finally within his grasp, he ordered a full-scale assault. It was the mistake that changed everything. As the Persian infantry advanced across the plain, they collided with disciplined ranks of heavily armored Greek hoplites. Unlike the narrow pass at Thermopylae, there were no cliffs to hide behind, no desperate last stand. This time, the Greeks fought as a united army. Their bronze armor, long spears, and tightly packed phalanxes steadily pushed the Persian line backward. Then came the decisive moment. During the fierce fighting, Mardonius was killed. Ancient sources describe him falling in the midst of battle, struck down as the Greek assault overwhelmed his personal guard. The effect was immediate. Without their commander, Persian discipline collapsed. What had begun as an organized advance quickly became a desperate rout. Thousands fled toward their fortified camp. The Greeks pursued relentlessly. By the end of the day, the Persian invasion force had been destroyed. But history records one extraordinary coincidence. On the very same day, or at least according to ancient tradition, the Greek fleet achieved another major victory across the Aegean at the Battle of Mycale, defeating the remaining Persian naval forces stationed on the coast of Asia Minor. Persia had lost on land. Persia had lost at sea. Its dream of conquering mainland Greece was over. The empire that had marched into Europe, believing itself invincible, had suffered two crushing defeats from an alliance it had once dismissed as hopelessly divided. Nearly a year earlier, Leonidas and his companions had stood alone at Thermopylae, knowing they would never live to see the outcome of the war. Now, at last, the price of their sacrifice had been paid. But the greatest victory was not the destruction of a Persian army. It was something far more enduring, the survival of Greece itself. When the last Persian soldiers fled the battlefield of Plataea, one thing became clear. The invasion was over. Less than 2 years earlier, King Xerxes had crossed into Greece believing nothing could stop him. He had marched with one of the largest armies the ancient world had ever seen. He had broken through Thermopylae. He had captured and burned Athens. Everything suggested that Greece was finished. Yet history took a different path. The victories at Salamis, Plataea, and Mycale did more than defeat an invading army. They preserved the independence of the Greek city-states. Without those victories, the future of Western civilization might have looked very different. Athens would go on to become the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and dramatic literature. Thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle would shape ideas that continue to influence the world today. History is rarely changed by a single battle, but sometimes it is changed by the time that battle creates. That is why Thermopylae remains one of history's greatest military stories. Leonidas did not defeat Xerxes. He never expected to. His mission was to delay the Persian advance for as long as possible, giving the Greek alliance precious time to organize its defenses by land and sea. In that sense, he succeeded. The stand at Thermopylae became a symbol that united cities which had spent generations competing against one another. Sparta and Athens were very different powers, often rivals, yet the Persian invasion forced them to fight for something greater than themselves. Not every detail of the famous story can be verified. Did exactly 300 Spartans make the final stand? No. Alongside them remained around 700 Thespians, who chose to fight to the death, and a smaller contingent of Thebans, whose role is still debated by historians. Did Xerxes truly order Leonidas' body to be desecrated? The ancient historian Herodotus says he did, though some modern scholars question whether the account reflects historical fact or later Greek tradition. As with many events from the ancient world, certainty is impossible. But one truth has survived every debate. The courage displayed at Thermopylae became far more powerful than the battle itself. Even the Persians remembered the extraordinary resistance they encountered in that narrow mountain pass. Centuries later, the story of the 300 Spartans would inspire soldiers, leaders, writers, and ordinary people across the world, not because they won, but because they refused to surrender when defeat was certain. So, what happened after the 300 Spartans died? Persia captured Athens. Then Persia lost its fleet. Then Persia lost its army. And finally, Persia lost its chance to conquer Greece forever. The 300 never returned home. Leonidas never witnessed the victories at Salamis or Plataea. But every Greek soldier who fought in those battles marched in the shadow of Thermopylae. Sometimes the people who change history never live to see it. And perhaps that is why, more than 2,500 years later, we still remember the names of Leonidas and the 300 Spartans, not as men who lost a battle, but as the warriors who gave an entire civilization the chance to survive.